Being offended is not proof that you were attacked. It's proof that you were affected. And those two things are not the same. We are living in a moment where people have begun to treat discomfort as danger, where disagreement feels like disrespect, where hearing a different opinion feels like being harmed. And when that happens, conversation dies. Because if every uncomfortable idea becomes a threat, then the only ideas allowed to exist are the ones that feel safe. But safety is not the purpose of conversation. Growth is. And growth requires friction. Growth requires tension. Growth requires hearing things you do not like and remaining stable anyway. That ability is called maturity, and it's becoming rare. Today, I want to talk to you about something that almost nobody says out loud anymore. If disagreement destabilizes you, the problem is not the person speaking. The problem is your stability. This is Without Permission, unfiltered conversations about identity, masculinity, power, culture, and the things we were told not to say out loud. I'm Chris Willingham, and today we're going to talk about why adults are losing the ability to disagree. There was a time when disagreement was normal. Friends disagreed, families disagreed, intellectuals disagreed. People argued ideas and then went to dinner together afterwards. Not because they agreed, because disagreement did not threaten identity. But today, many people experience disagreement as personal danger. And that shift has consequences. Because once disagreement becomes threatening, conversation becomes impossible. You cannot explore ideas if every challenge feels like an attack. You cannot grow intellectually if every opposing thought feels like disrespect. You cannot develop psychological stability if the world must constantly rearrange itself to keep you comfortable. The ability to tolerate disagreement is one of the clear signs of emotional maturity. Children require protection. Adults require resilience. And resilience means you can hear something uncomfortable without collapsing. Let's talk about what is actually happening psychologically. When someone challenges a belief that is deeply tied to your identity, your brain does not experience it as information. It experiences it as threat. Your nervous system reacts immediately. Your heart rate rises. Your thinking narrows. You stop listening. You start defending. Not because you are weak, because you are human. But here's the difference between emotional maturity and emotional fragility. Fragile people require the environment to change. Stable people regulate themselves. Fragile people say, that shouldn't be allowed. Stable people ask, why does that bother me so much? Fragile people try to control speech. Stable people expand their capacity to hear it. And the difference between those two responses is the difference between control and strength. Now let's talk about something that happens all the time. You say something, and someone responds with, you shouldn't say that. People get canceled for less. I'm just trying to help you. At first glance, those statements sound protective. They sound supportive. They sound like someone looking out for you. But underneath them is a quiet assumption. The assumption is that you cannot be trusted with your own voice. That someone else must supervise your thoughts. That someone else must regulate your opinions. that someone else must determine what you're allowed to say publicly. And once you accept that structure, you are no longer thinking independently. You are asking permission. This podcast exists for one reason: to stop asking permission. Another reason disagreement has become so difficult today is because outrage has become profitable. Social media rewards outrage. Algorithms amplify outrage. Attention flows towards outrage. And outrage creates the illusion of moral authority. If you appear offended, people assume you are morally correct. But being offended is not the same as being right. And outrage is not evidence of truth. Outrage is evidence of emotional intensity. Strength does not require outrage. Strength requires composure. A strong person can hear something offensive and remain calm. A strong person can hear something wrong and respond intelligently. A fragile person requires the idea to disappear. And when entire cultures begin organizing around removing offense, intellectual progress stops. Because ideas cannot evolve in environments that punish friction. Let's go a little deeper. The real problem is identity attachment. When beliefs become part of identity, challenging the belief feels like challenging the person. And once identity enters the conversation, logic leaves it. You stop asking, is this idea true? And start asking, do I feel safe? That shift turns conversations into protection. But protected beliefs do not grow stronger. They grow brittle. Brittle ideas cannot survive challenge, which is why challenge becomes threatening. Strong ideas welcome examination. Weak ideas require silence. Psychological stability is the ability to hold tension. You can hear something offensive and not panic. You can hear something wrong and not collapse. You can hear something challenging and remain curious. That's adulthood, not comfort, not constant agreement, not ideological safety, just stability. The ability to remain calm in the presence of difference. When people lose the ability to tolerate disagreement, society becomes fragile. Conversation becomes dangerous. Ideas become protected. And once ideas become protected, they stop evolving. This is how intellectual cultures stagnate, not because disagreement exists, because disagreement disappears. When only safe ideas survive, innovation dies. Truth becomes secondary to comfort, and comfort has never been the birthplace of progress. So let's ask a harder question. The next time you hear something that offends you, pause. Instead of asking, should this be allowed? Ask something deeper. Why does this affect me so strongly? Is it because the idea threatens something you believe? Is it because the idea challenges your identity? Or is it because the idea exposes something unresolved inside you? Those questions lead to growth. Silencing people does not. Now let me say this clearly. I do not need you or anyone to protect me from my own thoughts. If you're uncomfortable with them, regulate yourself. You are allowed to disagree with me. You're allowed to challenge me. You're allowed to think I'm wrong. But you are not entitled to supervise my voice. Adults regulate themselves. They do not regulate everyone around them. Let's make this practical. Because fragility rarely announces itself as fragility. It disguises itself as morality. It disguises itself as concern. It disguises itself as righteousness. You see it when someone hears a different political opinion and immediately labels the speaker dangerous. You see it when someone hears a joke they dislike and demand punishment instead of conversation. You see it when someone hears an uncomfortable fact and insists that it must not be said publicly, not debated, not examined, removed. The demand for removal is the giveaway. Stable people argue. Fragile people censor. Stable people counter ideas. Fragile people try to eliminate them. And the difference between those two responses determines whether a culture becomes stronger or weaker. Because cultures that tolerate disagreement evolve. Cultures that punish disagreement stagnate. Another confusion happening right now is the collapse between disagreement and disrespect. People are starting to treat disagreement as a moral violation. But disagreement is not disrespect. Disrespect is about how someone treats you. Disagreement is about what someone believes. Those two things are very different. A person can respect you deeply and still believe you're completely wrong. That's not hostility. That's intellectual honesty. But when identity becomes fragile, people start demanding agreement as proof of respect. And once that demand enters the conversation, honesty disappears. Because people begin performing agreement instead of expressing truth. Rooms become polite, but not real. And polite dishonesty does not build strong societies. It builds quiet resentment. There's another force driving the problem. Social media. Social media changed the way disagreement happens. In real life, disagreement is relational. You look someone in the eye, you hear tone, you sense nuance. But online, disagreement becomes spectacle. Everything becomes public, everything becomes amplified, and when something is public, people perform. They perform outrage. They perform righteousness. They perform moral superiority, not because they are malicious, because attention rewards it. Outrage travels faster than calm reasoning, which means the loudest emotional response rises to the top. And when outrage becomes the dominant tone of a culture, stability becomes rare. Because stability is quiet, and quiet rarely trends. So what does stability actually look like? It looks like restraint. It looks like listening longer than you speak. It looks like hearing an opinion you strongly disagree with and asking questions before reacting. It looks like curiosity. It looks like patience. Stable people do not panic when they hear challenging ideas. They investigate them. They ask, what makes this person believe that? What am I missing? What assumptions am I carrying? Fragile people skip those questions. They move straight to judgment, because judgment is faster than curiosity. But curiosity is where growth lives. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Many people are not afraid of disagreement. They're afraid of being wrong, because being wrong threatens identity. It threatens reputation. It threatens the image we've built of ourselves. So people defend ideas long after those ideas stop making sense. Not because the ideas are strong, but because admitting error feels humiliating. But stable adults understand something important. Being wrong is not humiliation, it's education. If you've never changed your mind, you are not learning, you are protecting. And protection is the enemy of intellectual growth. Let's pause for a moment, because this conversation is not about other people. It's about you. The next time you feel offended, ask yourself a question. What exactly am I protecting right now? Is it truth or identity? Is it evidence or ego? Because the answer to that question determines whether you grow or defend. Growth requires humility. Defensiveness requires certainty. And certainty is often the disguise of insecurity. A mature culture does not eliminate disagreement. It manages it. It creates space for people to speak freely and space for others to challenge them. Not with violence, not with censorship, with argument. Because argument is the engine of progress. Every major advancement in human history began with disagreement. Scientific disagreement, philosophical disagreement, political disagreement, social disagreement. If disagreement had been silenced, most of the ideas we rely on today would never exist. So when someone demands silence in the name of safety, they are often protecting comfort, not truth. Now let me be clear about something. Free speech does not mean speech without consequence. Words have impact. Words influence people. Words can harm relationships. But the answer to speech you dislike is more speech, not less. Challenge it, debate it, counter it, expose weakness in it. But do not pretend that removing it makes you stronger. Silence does not strengthen ideas. Testing them does. Let me say this clearly again. I do not need anyone protecting me from my own thoughts, and you don't need anyone protecting you from hearing them. If something I say bothers you, that's your nervous system responding, not evidence that the idea is dangerous. You are free to disagree. You are free to argue. You are free to walk away. But demanding silence is not strength. It's control. If disagreement destabilizes you, the problem is not the person speaking. The problem is your stability. Strong people do not fear opposing ideas. They refine themselves through them. Weak ideas require silence. Strong ideas welcome challenge. If your beliefs collapse under question, they were never strong to begin with. If your identity requires protection, it isn't secure. And if your voice requires permission, it isn't sovereign. You don't need agreement to exist. You need stability. I'm Chris Willingham, and this is Without Permission.